Hello there, guys. Can you all hear me okay? Excellent, fantastic. I'm just going to quickly turn off the meeting room again, just so anyone can join when they come in. Great. For some reason, some of your microphones seem to be popping on whilst it's coming in. So just when you join, could you just make sure you mute your microphone for me, please? That'd be brilliant. Thank you. Great, great, excellent. Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us once again for our session today. Today, we are going to be looking at a huge amount of different things that are going to be really, really, really important when it comes to living and working in China. We're going to be looking at Chinese culture. We're going to be looking at how to best understand the country that you're going to be living in. Quite recently, there was a statement that was made by the ambassador to the UK about things that could be done to help develop a better relationship between countries in the West and countries in China. And he spoke a lot initially about what he called an understanding deficit. And there very much is an understanding deficit in countries like the UK and the US when it comes to China. And going out to China, doing what you're doing for the next year is going to be massively, massively important for helping to bridge that understanding deficit that does exist. Essentially, through doing what you're doing, you are going to be actively working towards that. But heading out to China in the first place, it's important to really gauge and be honest with yourself about how much you know and how well prepared you feel you're going to be going to live in a completely different country with a completely different culture and a completely different language. I myself, when I went out, knew next to nothing about the country that I was going to. I didn't speak a word of Chinese. I barely understood anything to do with the country, its history, its culture. What I'd like to do first of all is just pop a little poll out just initially, just to get a bit of a gauge as to how well you guys feel you know China, how comfortable you feel you are with it before you head out. Again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. My answer would be hardly anything at all to it. So I'm just going to quickly pop that out now. Okay. So we've got, you know, what I think is a pretty good subsection there. The majority a little, a few hardly anything at all. I think that probably sounds about right. I certainly would have fallen into the hardly anything at all before I left. But I certainly am not as well educated, well versed as many of you are about the world and about China as well. So what today really is all about is to give you a little bit of an overview of the country, of its history, of its culture, covering a few of the key cultural concepts that exist in China. And then to have a little bit of a discussion, answer any questions that anyone might have as well. On our training day, we'll be going a little more in depth and be having a lot of exercises that are going to be based on it. So it's quite important that you listen quite carefully today to a few of these things, especially when we talk about core cultural concepts. I think this is probably our most important of these webinar sessions that we actually do, purely because it helps you gain that level of understanding before you head out. So let's get started. What we're going to look at, first of all, is an introduction to modern Chinese history and the context that is very important for understanding China today. We're going to be taking a look at cross-cultural understanding and some core cultural concepts that exist in China, how to understand those, how to try and best use those, and hopefully there'll be something that might pop up during your first few weeks or months in China that you'll stop and think, oh yeah, no, I remember that. I remember I was told about that. We'll be talking about some practical elements of living and working in China day to day by chatting a little more about the Great Firewall, applications that are used in China, apps that are used in China, and social media within China as well. And we'll also be taking a look at transport and getting around China, as well as leisure and entertainment whilst you're there too. But let's begin at the beginning, have a brief historic overview. Of course, China has over 5,000 years of continuous civilization, and as interesting and as awesome as it is to talk about and have conversations about with people, we unfortunately can't go into a huge amount of detail. But these are a few key points that, if you don't know already, might help in developing a bit of an understanding as to how China is as it is today, why it's different because of a historical context, and maybe pick up on a few sensitivities that might exist within the country itself. So throughout much of China's 5,000 years of continuous civilization, it's been composed of dynasties, kingdoms, and has frequently split into different sections, different warring factions, and periodically being united under single dynasties. These periods in which China are united, or most united, are often thought of as golden ages, where the population of the country has been its most affluent, where people have experienced the least upheaval and turmoil. A couple of examples of this are the Han and Tang dynasties. These are two dynasties that are really interesting to take a look at and to find out a little bit more about if you want to find out about the Chinese golden age of ideas, philosophy, of trade and economics. China is a country that for much of its existence simply wanted to be left alone. It was a country that was bountiful in terms of where it was in the world, where it, with a lot of arable land with which food could be grown, with which a large population could be fed. It was also a relatively decent climate throughout most of the country as well, where people could live relatively well. And for a lot of China's history, although there were many wars, there was a lot of upheaval, broadly speaking, when China was united and held under single dynasties, these were periods of historic great stability and progress within the country. Now, in terms of understanding modern China and how it is today, you can't not speak about what is called in China the century of humiliation. This is a little bit contested among scholars as to how long it actually lasted, but it's broadly thought it lasted from 1839 until 1939. It was defined by very serious subjugation and intervention from both Western powers and also Russia and imperial elements of China and the Japanese. The Opium Wars with Britain are broadly thought of as being the kickstarter to the century of humiliation, and the beginning of what were called the unequal treaties, starting with the Treaty of Nanjing, where the country was essentially opened up to the opium trade from Britain, as well as forcibly open to a lot of other trade coming in from the country. The Second Opium War as well was a result of this. And of course, these wars led to things such as the ceding of Hong Kong, the Kowloon Peninsula, as well as later after the Second Opium War, the new territories to Great Britain, which was seen as an enormous humiliation to the Chinese and seen essentially as an occupation of their land in order for the British Empire to be able to sell opium and essentially drugs to their population. There was also the Eight Nation Alliance and the Boxer Rebellion, which fought against the Eight Nation Alliance. The Eight Nation Alliance was essentially a formation in the late 19th century of the great imperial powers, including Japan, the United States, the United Kingdom, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the French, who all got together with the single purpose of trying to carve up China for themselves. And there's quite a famous image that you can see just here of the imperial powers carving up China in order to make profit, or as much profit as they could from the country. There was also the British expedition to Tibet in the early 20th century, which very much destabilized the western section of China. And of course, there was the 1927 to 1950 Chinese Civil War, which cost the lives of around 8 million people within the country, was a result of Chinese independence. 1937 to 1945, the Second Sino-Japanese War left 22 million civilians dead as well. The early parts of these are broadly seen as forming into the Century of Humiliation. Of course, the Century of Humiliation was bookended by the end of the Qing dynasty, the end of 5,000 years of dynastic rule within China. And in 1912, the Republic of China, or the first Republic of China, was formed following the Xinhai Revolution, which was spearheaded and masterminded by a chap down here you might have heard of called Sun Yat-sen. Sun Yat-sen is a very well revered figure in China today. And when I say in China, in both the People's Republic of China and also in the Republic of China, based in Taiwan. He's broadly seen as being the grandfather of Chinese independence from feudal rule. After 1912, China entered a period of very severe instability under what was essentially called the Beiyang government, led by a warlord called Yuan Shikai. The Beiyang government period was defined as being a period of great instability, of great division among China. And again, that sense of division of the country is what sparks fear into a lot of people today. It was warlord dominated and was broadly quite chaotic following the dissolution of the dynastic periods. The nationalist government led by the Kuomintang formed in 1928. The Kuomintang, for most of its period, was led by a handsome chap there called Chiang Kai-shek, who remained in power of the Republic of China throughout much of throughout the Second World War and throughout the Chinese Civil War, where he fought against Mao Zedong up here, who was the revolutionary communist leader of the People's Revolutionary Army and eventually the People's Republic of China. As I mentioned earlier, the civil war in China cost many, many lives, conservative estimates around 8 million. And when you combine that with the Sino-Japanese War, part of World War II that happened, 22 million dead, you can see the issues that division in China had caused from that point. In 1949, the People's Republic of China was declared, and after the communists won the civil war, and the nationalist government fled to its last outpost in Taiwan, where it essentially remains until this day. So the People's Republic of China and Mao, when it was first formed, China was seen as being, for the first time, becoming free from foreign influence and coercion, following the Century of Humiliation and following the great unrest and division that defined the Beiyang government and also the United States and Western-backed Kuomintang nationalist government. Many people celebrated as seeing this is the first time in 5,000 years of history that the future of China actually lies in its people's hands. That was the foundation of the Communist Party of China, the idea behind the Communist Party of China and the idea behind the People's Republic of China when it was first formed, which gives you a little bit of an insight into why people take so much pride in their country and their party. Imagine living in a country which for 5,000 years, the people themselves had never had the right to define their own lives. That was always decided by outside foreign interference or by a very rigid set of imperial powers. For the first time in over a century, the country's future really was truly in its own hands and was broadly seen that way. However, much of the 20th century, the PRC was absolutely fraught with hardship, struggle, terror, a huge amount of issues that arose. From 1958 until 1962, Mao instituted the Great Leap Forward, which was an attempt to very, very quickly industrialize from a predominantly entirely agrarian society. This caused a great famine, which left between 15 and 52 million people dead, depending on the figures that you want to take a look at. Then from 1966 until 1976, following a brief interjection period where Mao's power was waned away, Mao looked back to consolidate his power and also to try to consolidate his cult of personality by bringing in the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution saw at its lowest end the closure of many education institutions, the persecution of many people who were seen as being counter-revolutionary, and the formation of the Red Guard, made up predominantly of young Chinese zealots who were very keen on following the precise word of Mao and very keen on exercising the revolution of the Communist Party in its most extreme senses and to its most extreme excesses. During this period, there was a huge amount of terror. There were teachers dragged out of their houses for seeing as being counter-revolutionary. And the estimated dead that came as a result of the Cultural Revolution, again, the numbers very high and low between, depending on which figures you want to believe, but it ranges from hundreds of thousands of people dead to around 20 million people dead as a result of Mao's Cultural Revolution. This caused what was initially isolation on a global stage through design, of China being an independent country that held its future in its own hands, to an isolation of the country through what was seen as being tremendous upheaval, tremendous fear, and great disdain from the international community as to what was happening. A lot of this began to change in 1972 when President Richard Nixon visited China, and the country began its very first tentative steps of opening up and forging alliances with the West following the Sino-Soviet communist split and Cold Civil War that happened between Russia and China, the Soviet Union and China during that time. This led to a period of what is called the preceding opening up and reform in China, which essentially led to the building of what China is today. This was spearheaded by this chap here called Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping was a very diminutive chap in stature, but he was an incredibly charismatic, vibrant, energetic, and buoyant individual in how he dealt with people. If you watch some old videos back of Deng Xiaoping meeting presidents like Nixon and meeting Margaret Thatcher, you'll see the kind of body, and meeting the Queen, actually meeting the Queen is a fantastic video for you to see. You'll see this very gregarious, lively, energetic chap. And that gregarious, energetic sensibility that Deng Xiaoping had very much led a lot of his policy as well when it came to opening China to the world. He saw that the communist hardline, Marxist-Leninist, Maoist style of running an economy, running a country, and running a society was not the right way at this particular time for China to be developing. The right way for China to be developing at this particular time was through a controlled market economy that was gradually loosened and opened up to the rest of the world. So it began this process of reform and opening up in 1978, which celebrated its 40th anniversary a couple of years ago. The economic and social consequences of this were very significant as China became a global manufacturing hegemon during this time. The factories began to open out. trade began to pour in and out of the country, and a lot of wealth began to accumulate, which, due to China's controlled economy, meant that jobs were able to be created, and China had an incredibly low unemployment rate, as well as money being able to begin to be invested into things such as education, with the former Maoist policies of doing away with universities and many examinations, these being brought back, and the great investment being placed into education in China once again. Reform began to occur with social and political structures within the country. Welfare and freedom of opportunity became paramount, and people began to have a choice in the career that they wanted to pursue. People began to have a choice in the type of life that they wanted to lead within China, whilst still working towards this goal that had originally been set as the party. And during this time, China officially changed its national ideology from communism in the Marxist, Leninist, Maoist sense to what is called socialism with Chinese characteristics. It's a more flexible way of looking at China's ideological stance, and why China's ideological stance tends to change every 10 to 15 years when new leadership comes in. It's very structured. There are lots of plans that are put in place in order to best see China improve, grow in its stature. And these 5-year, 10-year plans are followed to the absolute letter according to what ideology at any particular time is viewed to be most beneficial. Now, a lot of this led to what China is today. China today is absolutely unrecognizable from the China of the 1960s and 70s during the Cultural Revolution under Mao. It's a confident and prosperous country with freedom of opportunity that's been absolutely unseen 30 years ago. The younger generation that's growing up in China now, those of you who, those who are under 30, or those who are under 40 really, grew up in a China that was completely different, completely unrecognizable from the China that their parents grew up in. Over 160 cities that have populations in excess of 1 million people, due to the mass urbanization and successful urbanization drive that China has had and continues to have, with more and more people moving from the countryside to the city to work within sectors such as technology and innovation. Innovation as well has been a huge aspect of China today, leading in areas such as AI, as well as climate change technology. But what there's also been in modern China has been a renaissance in traditional Chinese culture, and more of an acceptance and celebration of China's history than had been seen in previous decades, particularly during the Cultural Revolution, where it was seen as being good to literally smash with sledgehammers what were called the olds, where you would see tons of beautiful Chinese artifacts literally destroyed in order to rid China of the old so it can progress to its new communist heights that it seeks to do. Today, there's a bit less of that. And there is much more celebration of traditional Chinese culture. Chinese traditional soap operas are the most popular things on TV in China from the old imperial ages. There's an acceptance, not a doing away of China's history. And China has become global facing and internationally minded. Now, within the last year or two, with the trade war between the United States and China, there's been an attempt to once again isolate the country within itself. There has been more disputes between China and certain other countries, but working within the field of working with China, if you want to understand the country, if you want to speak to people, if you want to get to know it, China is absolutely open-armed with it. China is still welcoming in foreign students to come and study, people to come and work, and people to come and see their country and build business and education relationships. This is really the biggest difference between modern China and the preceding 5,000 years, which, if you remember at the start, I mentioned kind of just wanted to be left alone. For the first time in China's history, it certainly doesn't want to be left alone. It wants investment, and it also wants to invest. China wants to become a country where people are excited to visit, excited to invest in, and it's a country where when you go, you really do feel that. But of course, with all of this, there are some absolute hard truths that Westerners have to learn and accept when moving to China. There's an enormous emphasis on stability and authority. A lot of this has to do with the fact that, as I mentioned a few times already, China is seen as being most prosperous, is seen as being least tumultuous when it is united. Those periods where China is not united, where it's not strongly led, those are the periods of chaos where people die, where people have starved. There's not a welcoming of outside critical opinion within China. Again, a lot of this comes from a lot of het-ups that come from things like the Century of Humiliation, where Western powers essentially subjugated their country for 100 years and then proceeded to tell them that they were immoral by what they were doing or the structures that they had. Also through people who have lived in Western countries where our history is, and our morality is defined by things like the Enlightenment, by things like Christianity. China has existed for 5,000 years with very, very different moral standpoints, very different ideas of what morality is and how a society and a political structure should run. As part of this, within the country, there's no freedom of the press. Everything is pretty much state-run that comes out. There's no freedom of assembly. You're not going to see, a bunch of people doing unauthorized protests within China as you would in the West. Neither should you engage in such things. Wounds are still sore from a tragic past, and there is still sensitivity on a national scale. Discussion of politics generally isn't the norm among people within sort of large groups when talking with each other. Again, I really do have to stress with stuff like this, if you chat with politics about your Chinese friend, people in black suits aren't going to come and take you away. I chat about politics with Chinese friends all the time. But it's about being discreet about who you're talking to, because you never know if someone's going to be offended by that. You never know if someone is going to be upset by what you're saying. You never know if you're going to damage a relationship due to this understanding deficit that still exists. And China does still have a very independent outlook that it looks to keep. And because of that, you'll very often see in the news, and when you're in China, when foreigners will criticize China or not be diplomatic about China, people tend to be very sensitive about that. But again, like a lot of people would in any country, if someone came and was a guest in your country and just started criticizing things. Does anyone have any questions just on anything that we've covered just there? What I'll do as well is just quickly pop out a second poll for everyone. Do feel free to pop any questions that you might have in the question box, or if you want to ask a question, if you want to use the function to put your hand up, do that as well. If you've got any questions, pop that in there. I'm just going to quickly pop out another poll for you. So in a moment, we're just going to be talking about core cultural concepts in China, but it'd be interesting to see from you all what you feel the most admired character traits would be in China among people. Okay, so we've got 67% saying hard work, 2 for modesty, 2 for confidence. I would probably agree with you. Most people culturally in China would view hard work, working hard, making a better life for themselves, their family, and their country as being the most admirable trait in there. A lot of this comes into Confucianism as well, with things like modesty and honesty being incredibly important too. and within modesty, things like diplomacy, modesty actually is a very important concept. And it links in to a fair bit of what we'll be talking about just now. So let's head back and take a look at two of the most important cultural concepts within China. The first is Mianzi, or face. I'm sure many of you will have heard the concept of face, of keeping face, having face, losing face. It's a little bit of a woolly concept, I guess, in the West. To have face or to lose face, broadly, you'll kind of know what it means. And within a lot of situations, no one likes to lose face, no one likes to be embarrassed, no one likes to cause someone, or well, if you're not a horrible person, you don't like to cause someone to be very embarrassed or very upset. But within China, it really does underpin almost every single personal relationship that exists. So the concept of face is absolutely vital to understanding relationships within China and appropriate discourse to take. It might seem simple at first, but there are a lot of subtle nuances that exist. It's important to always have face and to give face and ensure that your actions cause neither yourself nor the person you're speaking with to lose face. So how might this work? Say, for instance, you are sat at a meeting. In the West, we might have a very flat management structure where people can put their hands up and you're encouraged to disagree and, sometimes encouraged to disagree quite boisterously or forcefully or with authority. Within China, very often you'll see a much more diplomatic approach to absolutely everything, from the smallest disagreement to the most important decisions that are taken within a boardroom. Simply disagreeing with someone can mean that that person will lose face, particularly if they're a figure of authority. So it's always important to think and use your discretion, especially when you're surrounded by other people, as to who you might be disagreeing with and how you might go about that. In China, a lot of people say that there is not necessarily a straightforward A to B with a conversation. It goes to a lot of other places before you get the answer you might want. And this can affect you in your daily life. And again, this is connected to Mianzi. Say if you're speaking to an HR representative or a teaching assistant and you ask them to help you with something. Now, if they are unable to help you with that for logistical or even sort of legal reasons, they may not initially say no to you. They might say, maybe we'll look at this. It might be possible in order to do this. So when asking questions that you want a really straightforward answer to in China, where the person you're speaking with is not afraid of losing face or losing the company's face, it's quite often important for you to sort of express to them, maybe saying, I don't mind if you can't do this for me, but if you could just let me know if you absolutely can or absolutely can't, that's great. Like I say, I really don't mind. It doesn't affect me at all if you can't do this for me. Otherwise, they might feel if they weren't able to do something for you, they might lose face, and then you're left in the state of limbo thinking that they were going to do something for you, but they're not. Now, a Chinese person will be able to translate their rejection, but you might not be able to translate their rejection quite so easily in that case. So it's always important to be very clear that you're not going to be upset with someone in China if the answer is going to be no. There's a bit of a north-south divide in this, and of course everyone is an individual. But working with a lot of Chinese, this often can sometimes be a problem that can lead to a bit of misunderstanding, particularly in the workplace. And likewise yourself, when it comes to giving face, if you have a disagreement with your boss or with a leader, or you disagree with something perhaps they've said or an idea they've said in a meeting, it is always a good idea to say, yes, this is a really great idea. Maybe we could also try this as well, as opposed to shooting down an idea initially, but suggesting an idea on top of it that might change the whole idea that they have in the first place anyway. Example of this that I have, when I was working at a private language center in China, my boss suggested that we do a Christmas extravaganza where all of the kids dress up as Smurfs and we do a 2-hour play around the Smurfs that was going to be written, and the children all had to learn their lines. Now, these children were between the ages of 4 and 8. Everyone at the table sat around and agreed because it was the boss. I was thinking, well, my kids absolutely will not be able to memorize all of this, and it won't be very good. I'd been at the company for a little while by this point and kind of knew China a little bit more. I'd had a few similar instances where things like this had happened before, and, you know, we did a thing and it was a bit rubbish, but it was fine. I kind of didn't want this to be rubbish. So me and my colleague had a little bit of an aside chat, and we said, I think this is a really, really great idea to do this, and to do this play with the Smurfs. That's such a good idea because the film has just come out in the cinema, and all the parents and all the kids will know about it and they'll love it. So a lot of flattery, a lot of things like that. A really great idea to boss, give him face, give him face, give him face. But maybe what we could do, so the kids get their words absolutely perfect, and so they can see how well this company is teaching their kids English, is to make it just a tiny little bit shorter. So maybe if we just make it 20 minutes instead of 2 hours, then what we can do is really show how great our company is at teaching them English in a shorter period of time. So they'll be able to do that a lot better, as opposed to saying, as I might in the UK, if someone had brought this up, saying, oh, I think 2 hours is a bit too long, we should do it a bit shorter than that. You know, that doesn't sound offensive to most of you, if that's an idea. But in China, that could be really offensive to lose a boss's face. So making sure you give lots of face, give lots of face, give lots of face, and give a diplomatic solution in order to get what you want. It's really important to think about that. On our training day, we'll be doing a few exercises where we actually focus and come up with a few ideas for some situations where you might want to do this. Now, another cultural concept is guanxi. So guanxi is the concept of relationships. Guanxi is a communication tool that goes beyond any kind of app or technology that you can have, and is so ingrained in Chinese culture, it's unreal. Relationships are totally key to everything. Everyone in China will know someone who will know someone through their immediate connections, who can get something done, who can do something for you, who can help you out with something. And the greater your network, the bigger prestige you have in the country. Few people within China ever rely on a small circle of friends and acquaintances. They rely on a very vast, very large network of people, and you'll find lots of people wanting to invite you for dinner, exchanging gifts with you, and doing all kinds of things like this in order to expand their guanxi, in order to have you in their social network, as you are a foreigner, as you are someone who is different, as you are someone who will enrich their network of friends and enrich their lives. Now, this isn't an entirely selfish concept, and I really do have to stress this. This isn't a sort of like, oh, we're going to use you in order to get something better kind of thing. It's a lot deeper than that, because it's a very core cultural Chinese concept, whereby in order to do business, first we must be friends. So you'll often find people that you'll be working with will invite you out to family dinners more often than things like happen in the UK. You might meet people, you might meet Chinese at expat bars and places like that who will invite you out to have a holiday with them after meeting them for 2 hours. If you have a Chinese fiance or a Chinese partner, very often you'll be welcomed into their family very quickly and very affectionately. And it's a very warm, very nice concept, but it can feel overwhelming at first, because it's something that we're simply not used to. We're not used to people within this coming in this way. And trust within these relationships is enormously important. So being able to deliver on something that you've said you can deliver on, once you have a strong connection, is incredibly important. And it is intrinsically linked to Mianzi in a way in which, in order to establish guanxi and this vast network of connections of people who you'll get to know and who will enrich your life, both in terms of social and professional, you need to obey a lot of Mianzi rules as well whilst you're there. social, business, and political discourse all take place within the realms of Guanxi. Guanxi can sometimes, at the higher ends, spill into corruption, which is a very big issue that there always has been in China, because of course there's a fine line between having these networks of people and using these people to further your own objectives. The core concept of Guanxi is that you are not solely using your network to further your objective, but you are living within your network to enrich everyone's objectives, if that makes sense. And again, it kind of comes back to this collectivist culture and this collectivist mindset and way of thinking that China has, which is a little bit different from the default setting that we might have in the West about professional networks. Of course, in China as well, dining and the importance of food is an incredibly critical point to look at. Dining is the most important cultural environment within China, and it will normally be asked to eat as part of introductions, beginning friendships, meeting people from within various networks. Restaurants within China are very much gauged on their quality by the amount of noise that is happening around them, as opposed to a quiet, ambient kind of atmosphere. So this can be a little bit of a shock to a few people when they go to China for the first time, because every restaurant you go into is going to be loud. People are going to be toasting, gambaying with each other. People are going to be doing things like singing at tables to everyone else as well. Seating arrangements within this is going to be something that you're going to notice as well. You'll notice that the most important person will sit facing the door, and the other important people will sort of be around them, and it'll gradually go like that as it goes around the table. So if you are seated next to the person who is facing the door, then you are in a very privileged position. You've been given a great honor within China. A lot of people as well ganbei. Really useful little tip for you with ganbeiing, which is essentially toasting or cheering, is if you are ganbeiing someone who is superior to you, or if you want to show deference, which is again a very good thing to try to do in China, toast lower down on their glass. Try to toast as low down as possible. If the other person is trying to compliment you as well, they'll try to toast low down. So quite often you might have a little bit of a war to the bottom of your cup that you'll have with someone across from you. You'll both try to go down as low as you possibly can to show that you are being deferent to the other person, which can be quite fun. There's a little bit of a modesty war when you're in China. I got to mention as well, actually, something that's quite recent, that's this Clearing Your Plate initiative. Now, I would used to have said that something that's a little bit different in China is you should always leave a little bit of food on your plate so that people don't try to keep feeding you. Because when you're in China, people will keep feeding you. They'll keep giving you food and putting it on your plate because they want you to have eaten enough. They want to make sure that you have been absolutely well fed. And if you clear your plate, it's an indication that, oh, I haven't eaten enough. So they'll keep going, or they might even be a little bit offended because they might think, oh, I've not given you enough food. This is changing, and changing very much by design by the government over the last few weeks, actually, with what's called the Clean Plate Initiative in China, where they're trying to conserve food. They're trying to stop wastage. So I wouldn't quite bring that up. So do always try and clean your plate now in China. Do the opposite of what I will have said in previous years, which is always leave a little bit of food if you're full. There are the 8 great regional cuisines of China, which are relatively good to know about. You'll find restaurants for these all over the country. But for those of you who are going to be within these provinces, if you eat the provincial food within the province itself, it's always absolutely the best. So those of you who are going to be in Chengdu, you're going to have some really nice spicy food. It is the absolute tastiest you can ever have. The strips of spicy pork are the most delicious that you can get. The traditional dish in the Guangdong region, Canton region, is quite light and sweet. You go up to Shanghai, again, it's quite light and sweet as well. There's a lot of emphasis placed on things like dumplings, like lamb dumplings and things there as well. You go up to Shandong, you've got a lot of seafood there. Anhui and Fujian are quite wheaty, quite mountainous in there, and Hunan is incredibly hot. Very, 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 very hot indeed, and quite sour as well. If you go up to Dongbei, Shenyang and areas around there, you'll often have quite sort of warming food, as well as a mix of quite vinegary and potatoey foods as well. Does anyone have any questions just for the moment on any of those concepts of cultural understanding, on Mianzi or on Guanxi? Okay, let's move on. So transport in China. So there's a lot of transport options that are absolutely available to you when living in China. Whether it's within your city itself or traveling to different cities or traveling around the country. Within the city in which you're going to be living, I think all of you within first and second tier cities will have all of these forms of transport. Buses, these are usually the cheapest forms. Your HR representatives will set you up with knowledge of all the bus routes that you can take, and they cost between 1 and 2 renminbi per journey, so about 10 to 20p for each journey that you want to take on the bus. Metro services, again, I think in all of the cities where you're going to be based, there are metros with at least 2 lines. 2 to 6 renminbi, depending on distance. However, for those of you who will be commuting into work, your commute will very rarely ever be more than the 2 renminbi. But again, hey, 70p to go across the entire city for 20 miles isn't too bad. There are also taxis that you can take. These range between 6 to 15 renminbi on the starting meter. But you can also use Didi, which I'll go into in a moment when I talk about apps, which is often a little bit cheaper than that. And you can also get bike rentals in pretty much all major cities in China as well, which are free for the first hour, and then 1 renminbi after that. You'll be able to use Alipay and WeChat Pay to be able to scan barcodes on bikes and use those as long as you return them. For exploring China, you can use one of the very many high-speed rail links that exist within the country. The trains themselves go average about 200 miles per hour and can take you from Beijing to Shanghai in less than 5 hours. They can take you from Shenzhen to Shanghai in less than 6, and are a really cool way to get around the country. They're very comfortable, they're very modern. They can be quite lively environments as well, though. People are eating whilst you're in there. You can also get sleeper trains as a cheaper alternative, but also as an experience. You can see here, sleeper trains usually include lots of bunks that you lay out on. If you are going to get a sleeper train, try to ensure that you get one where you have a top or bottom bunk, so you're not stuck in the middle. I sometimes find myself stuck in the middle of the sleeper train, which isn't usually the best place to be. There are also internal flights, lower tax rate on those. Internal flights have historically been quite cheap within China. And you can book all of these on Trip or Ctrip. But a good little hint to get around paying full price is to ask a Chinese friend to see if they can book your trip on their Ctrip, and you give them the money, because if you do that, it's very often cheaper if it's done on the Chinese Ctrip app. Now, with traveling in China outside of your city, this, of course, is all going to be very dependent on the COVID-19 cases that exist in the country at any particular time. If there are any reports of cases, be they asymptomatic or symptomatic, within a city or even a region, you will have to remain within that region. When you go to China, if you go and there hasn't been a full ridding from the world of coronavirus, as I'm certain there won't be, you will have a healthcare app, which I've spoken about in previous videos. It'll be green, yellow, or red, showing if you have been in an area that's deemed as being at risk. China is taking a zero tolerance to this. So say if you were living in Shanghai and there was a report of 1 case in Shanghai, that would mean you wouldn't be able to leave Shanghai to go to any other municipalities or cities at any particular time. So travel, while bearing in mind coronavirus when you arrive, is incredibly important for the time being too. Right. Does anyone have any questions on transport in China? Let's see, we'd be able to rent a car if we wanted to. Really, really, really good question there. Yes, um, you can rent a car in China. There is an insurance issue that you need to go around, and you will need to pay a fair bit for that. You also won't be able to just simply take your British or American or Canadian driving license to a car rental place and rent it out using that. You'll need to apply within China to get a temporary Chinese license that you'll be able to use. I think it's usually for a year, but I can't be absolutely certain. If you want to do that, chat with an HR representative from your school or chat with a Chinese friend to see if they can help you do it. It's relatively simple. That won't last forever, and you would eventually need to take and apply for a full driving test as it is. I personally wouldn't recommend, when living in a city, driving within a city in China. The rules of the road are a little bit different. They are a little bit hairier. It's nothing like those of you who might have been to sort of Southeast Asia and seen some of the chaos that happens there. There are rules that happen, but they're very different to over here. So I wouldn't recommend driving at all within a first year of being in China. But looking into doing something that at a later point is possible. But you will need to get a license. You will need to get a temporary Chinese license in order to be able to do that yourself. Okay. Going online in China. Well, the first thing that you can't avoid is the Great Firewall. China operates an incredibly tight level of internet security. YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Google, all of them blocked, but you can Bing to your heart's content if you are that way inclined. Use of a VPN really is absolutely necessary and needed, to be completely honest, if you're a Westerner going to China. I am yet to meet a foreigner in China who does not use a VPN, who has gone full native, because, you know, staying connected to what we are used to is very important. There are a number of different VPN services that are available, and they're quite simple to use. They just look like this. You pay for a subscription. Make sure you pay for your subscription, download your subscription before you leave. And all you need to do is select a location where you want to go from. If you're in China, the best locations to do are the locations that are closest to you. So always select an Asia Pacific one. Hong Kong is a good one to select. That's usually the closest. If you're in the north, maybe Japan. Sometimes Australia works really well for whatever reason. You just select one of those, hit connect, and you are good. You can access all of those things. Now, again, people in black suits aren't going to come and take you away for using a VPN. Every foreigner in China uses a VPN. It's completely accepted and tolerated. There's no problem at all with it. What you need to remember to do before you go to China is download your VPN and pay for your VPN, because of course the VPN websites themselves within China are blocked. Even when using sites within China, you know, be discreet about what you post. Don't post anything inflammatory about the country or about things like that online. It just won't do you much good. Within China, there are a number of popular social medias that are used, which are fun to get to know. And if you really, really want to immerse yourself in the environment there and try to learn Chinese or written Chinese, it's an important thing to do to start using social media platforms as a tool to do that. There's WeChat, first of all, which is an absolute necessity in China. It's not just a social media thing, it's everything. You will use it to communicate everything with all of your friends, with all of your colleagues. It will become the app that you use more than anything else. You'll use it to pay for things. You'll use it to order taxis. You'll use it to order hotels. You'll use it to book doctor's appointments if you need to, because it's so easy and it's in English as well once you have it. There's also Douyin, which is TikTok. It's the original TikTok. It works exactly the same, as in exactly the same. as TikTok does. It even pretty much looks exactly the same. You can see TikTok and Douyin just there on my phone. They look like exactly the same thing as each other. Within Douyin, the interface is, again, pretty much identical. Content's relatively similar, people lip syncing to stuff, but also you'll find things that are educational. You'll find a lot of news on this as well. There really is quite a lot that you can get from Douyin. It's very much the most popular platform within China to use as social media. There's Weibo, which is China's microblogging, Twitter-like site, where you'll find a lot of interesting chatter and sharing of stories, sharing of latest news events. If you're interested to see what people's opinions are on society at the moment within China, Weibo is a really good place to go to take a look at that, to get a feeling for what Chinese people, what the mood of the nation is at any one particular time. QQ is the most popular email service that's used. Everyone ends up getting a QQ email. Most Chinese people have a very long number as their QQ email address, as opposed to a name, which can be quite irritating to learn and memorize at first. There's also Youku and Tudou, which are essentially the sort of YouTubes of China. Dianping, which is the Yelp, and Douban, which is pretty much like the Spotify of China as well. These are really useful to be able to use. Using things like Douban as your Spotify will include pretty much any and all music that you would have on Spotify. It's easier to use for you. Now, here are some of the apps that you could really use in China. First of all, there's Alipay. Alipay is used by most people in China to pay for anything, anywhere. It's also got a really great interface where you can access online marketplaces to find pretty much anything you want to buy, where you can order food from, where you can book holidays, where you can book doctor's appointments. It's quite similar to WeChat in that sense. There's Taobao, which is essentially the Amazon of China, but quicker and, to be honest, better. It's like Amazon, but there is literally anything you want on there, and it can be delivered to you on the day that you order it. Baidu Translate, if your VPN's acting up and Google Translate isn't working, is a very good translator. In my opinion, it's probably just about overtaken Google Translate now in terms of how good it is. It's got a really, really good feature, a really good conversation feature, where you can just turn it on and talk to the person opposite you with it. That works quite seamlessly and quite well at the moment. Baidu Maps is also the best map device for getting around in China. There's a very interesting fact about China, which is one of the many, many oddities that exist in it, which is only state-sponsored companies or companies that have a special license from the state can actually provide purely accurate maps within China for GPS positioning. So you'll often find if you go to China, Google Maps is usable, but you are permanently around 500 meters. Your location is listed as being around 500 meters away from the location that you're actually in. And that's the case with a lot of other actual map apps as well. So say if you're looking for a particular building, you might think you're there, but actually the map is showing you 500 meters away from the building, because although they have permission to use a map in China, they don't have legal permission to show exact locations and coordinates. Baidu Maps does, so it's a really good way of actually getting around. There's also Didi, which is the Uber for China. Everyone uses Didi now. This has been one of the biggest changes over the last 7 years. When I went to China for the 2 years that I was there, everyone still hailed down taxis, still called taxis down from the side of the road. You can still do that, of course, but Didi has become very much the norm for people now when they're wanting to get around particular cities. It's actually a little bit cheaper as well. And then there is also Meituan and Ele.me, which are the food delivery apps. These are great. You can find anything you want from any restaurant at all on there. You even get like your McDonald's or your Burger Kings and things like that on there, but also anything from any Chinese restaurant that's anywhere nearby to you, delivered to you incredibly swiftly. Does anyone have any questions on using the internet in China? I see we've got an early one from Rishi. In case COVID-19 does have another outbreak within China and teaching does stop, will we be paid to cover rent, etc.? Yes, so there will likely actually be clauses within contracts once you come back to working, which will cover what will happen in the case of a second outbreak in the country. For the teachers that we had who were living and working in China, they predominantly did their teaching online. Some may have had a small pay cut, but their accommodations were still provided for, and they were still given, absolutely more than enough for subsistence and to supply on. With the majority of those received their full pay during that time. Absolutely no one was not covered for things like rent, food, basic needs and goods. And actually the majority did most of their working classes online anyway. Nathan, do you have to be careful about leaving your VPN on if you take your laptop into work, for instance? No, it's absolutely fine. That's cool. It's no problem. You're not going to get picked up on that. A lot of international schools and even quite a few public schools have their own VPN built into things because they need to access educational tools. So that's no problem at all. Using a VPN, it's not going to offend anyone. It's not going to make anyone upset with you. It's not a particular area of sensitivity. I mean, obviously, maybe don't watch things that are really, really anti-China in front of a bunch of Chinese people if you've got a VPN on. But using a VPN in and of itself, using Google, using Facebook, using YouTube and things like that, no problem at all. Okay, let's proceed. So leisure activities in China, where can you go? What can you do? There's a huge amount that you're able to do living and working in China. Restaurants are the most popular destinations to go to. A lot of this is cultural. A lot of people will sit around a restaurant. Hot pot is a really, really popular option if you're wanting to be sociable. It's essentially a big giant pot that you put in the middle of a table. It warms up. You have a bunch of raw meats, as well as a bunch of vegetables that come over. You can separate those two within the pot if someone's a vegetarian, or you can have separate pots if someone's a vegetarian, and you pop them all in, you cook them, you chat, you laugh, you drink if you want to drink, and have a really, really great time. You can do this with Chinese friends, with Western friends. All cities in China will have lots of hot pot restaurants. The most popular chain is called Haidilao. There actually is a Haidilao in London now, which is pretty much always entirely just full of Chinese. Haidilao is the best place to go to socialize as a restaurant, but there's all kinds of other restaurants which are great environments for you to be able to sit in, to speak with people, and to really unwind. Within first and second tier cities, there's a really good mix of both Chinese but also Western restaurants as well. Very often in a lot of cities, you'll find that there are Western managed or Western owned restaurants by seasoned expats within particular cities. These are particularly fun places in second and third tier cities, as they tend to act as sort of hubs for expat communities. Remember, there was a burger restaurant that was in Shenyang called Casey's. It was run by a Canadian guy called Casey and his Chinese partner. And it was a really, really great place to go because the small but vibrant expat community that lived there all went there every Thursday to do the quiz at Casey's. It was sort of part of the regular schedule, and places like that are fantastic, and you'll find them very, very quickly within cities that you're working in. These developed expat populations will have hives and centres of activity that you'll find quite easily and will be very quickly directed to by your colleagues. These are usually based relatively close to major consulates or embassies within cities in which you're going to be based. But sometimes they're not, but most of the time they're based relatively close to places like that. All kinds of bars, all kinds of restaurants. Within bars in China, certainly in second and third tier cities, to be honest, not really in first tier cities anymore, you might sometimes be given free drinks, free shots and things like that, which is always very nice by the bar managers or owners, because they want to keep your custom, especially if you're good for business, as has previously been the case for Westerner or a foreigner who's seen drinking somewhere. It's usually a pretty cool place to go. There are also an absolute abundance of malls, cinemas, bowling alleys, arcades, absolutely anything you could want within second, first and third tier cities in China. They are absolutely everywhere. Most metros go underneath these buildings. They're great fun places to spend a day out. There are also lots of different areas outside, such as parks, historic monuments, depending on where you are. A lot of that's very city specific, but this is quite broad in speaking. There's been a very big boom over the last 4 or 5 years in China on physical health and fitness, with a lot of gyms located again in the vast majority of malls. You don't have to walk far to find a gym. If you live in an area that has urban amenities, you'll find a gym within a couple of 100 meters of yourself. Expat WeChat groups are great for finding things like art clubs, sports teams, and other societies as well that are made up of expats. Again, speaking with your colleagues, speaking with your friends is very important with this. Expat communities in China are very tightly knitted, especially in second and third tier cities. They're places that will take you under their wing and look after you, and very, very friendly. Whereas individual ESL teachers in some forums, if you go online, can sometimes be a little bit standoffish and cold over the internet. They don't represent what the real expat communities who live in countries like China are, who are really welcoming, have great senses of humor, and any situation that you find yourself in, any stresses that you find yourself going through, they will have been through themselves as well. And does anyone have any questions on leisure and any final questions as well before we finish today? Had pig brain in hot pot. Yum. Yeah, you can definitely get pig brain in hot pot. Callum, what are the chances to find sports clubs for rugby, boxing, ultimate frisbee? Really good question, Callum. Actually, really, really good question. So I just want to show you something here. It does a little bit depend on the city where you're going to be based. But this is the Gaelic football team for Shenzhen. That gives you a little bit of an idea of how easily you can find these clubs, particularly in first and second tier cities in China. If something doesn't exist, then you can always make one. Within China, there will be all of these things to exist. Ultimate Frisbee does definitely exist in China. I have known for there to be expat communities that play it, but setting things up yourself or speaking with a group of friends who are like-minded and getting a squad set up for that yourself is very, very easy, very, very good to do. Rugby, boxing, dead simple. There will be rugby clubs, there will be boxing clubs, first and second tier cities in China, and there will be expats who will be doing that. There are cricket clubs in the vast majority of first and second tier cities within the country as well. You'd honestly be very surprised at expats that are willing to go out and do these things. Again, it depends on the size of the city where you are, how good these people are going to be at certain things. So say, for instance, in Shenyang, there was an expat cricket team, and they were made up of people from Turkey and America and the US and the UK, because they just fancied playing cricket. And they fancied playing cricket against the Chinese university teams that were playing cricket there at that particular time with a mini league. And you know, they were rubbish because they were learning, but it was a lot of fun. But in the larger cities, you know, you'll find a lot more of that. You'll find some quite competitive local Chinese teams who want to play against foreign teams as well. Football, of course, is a very easy one. You'll find tons of five-a-side weekly tournaments and things to do. But again, speaking with expat communities and getting involved with that, if something doesn't exist yet, then take the initiative and try to make it exist. That's how things really do get started. I started a drama club when I was in Shenyang, and it was really, really fun to do. You know, it's really, really easy, and you'll find very quickly that expat communities are very keen to jump on board with any new ideas. Does anyone else have any questions just at the moment? Any creative writing communities online? I know that there's definitely a huge amount of interest among teachers for that. But again, you know, speak with expats within the community in which you're working, because if you want to do things online, great, you know, you can do things over WeChat and chat with people, but being able to meet up in libraries, in coffee shops weekly for things like book meetings, things like creative writing meetings is a great idea. And remember as well, that in a lot of these cities, the majority of people who are going to be there with you are going to be English teachers as well. And they will also and a lot of them will have an interest in things like literature and creative writing. Things are never short of groups like that, or sort of de facto groups for things like creative writing. There's lots of groups for things like knitting as well, and poetry. There are absolutely all sorts. And again, as I mentioned to Callum's question, if there's not something that you can find, then take the initiative and chat with someone that you know in the expat community and try and make it yourself. Does anyone else have any other questions just at the moment? Okay, great. Well, in which case we shall pop this again online. I do apologize about the first lesson not being available. Unfortunately, the file's corrupted itself and not able to upload itself to YouTube, but I shall get this one on there again along with 2 and 3. But thank you, along with episode 2 even. But thank you very much all for joining us today. Hope you all have a really, really great weekend. Thank you and goodbye. 谢谢.